historical context,
Okay, 30 more seconds.
Oh, you want to see San Diego? That's where I was born.
Santiago.
probably common.
Is it gonna snow today?
Here?
Because you have to force kids to do everything.
No, it's not. But it's
They have to
going to
school.
30.
They have to go to sports.
It's
They
snowed
have
a
to
little
go
bit
to
in the colonies.
But how you go about it, that can make them very averse.
It snowed in the colonies.
I understand what you're saying, because a lot of my friends, I have friends that do that from.
So they
I have a friend that has a friend
what is everything in the
time with her, because it's cool,
indicates
that's what
Jesus?
that's all. To watch
Right,
cartoons,
is it like
they just
These
cartoons
are
and
things are pointing
yes,
back that this
you
has
know,
been done in the scriptures.
and
And
sleep on her
Fractional
chest,
share.
you know. But we don't know, special clothes that we
Oh, so you just very
wear. Only for December?
Yeah, just regular.
But it's actually the size of
We're
the
just doing that
So
regularly.
so
So she made us like look for a sweat. So my brother and I like ours.
Even if you have, there's like 25 super solid ones, but then maybe that are like really solid. And if you really push out, there's like 330.
Oh, dang.
From the Old Testament that were all validated in the story of the New Testament.
Because it is expensive.
And that's my first thing of like, okay, can I validate that like the Old Testament pointing to the Messiah?
Right.
Because people said, okay, what does that mean? Like, how is that matched up with stuff? This is probably one of my 10 that I saw.
Different than other days of the week. So that's why she did with the clothing.
So are you personally putting these together, or is it something where you just?
No, I'm gonna personally do it. Yeah. Using like research online, which is a little bit.
All right, let's come together. Let's come together. Okay, let's come together. Quick question. Anyone here that thinks that studying the Bible is not that difficult? Any of you guys in here that thinks studying the Bible is not that difficult? Okay, everybody thinks it's difficult then. Most of you guys think it's difficult, more on the difficult side. Okay. That's good. All right. Every so often we meet somebody who says with a great feeling, you don't have to interpret the Bible, you just read it and do what it says. After all, anyone with a half a brain can read it and understand it. The problem with too many preachers and teachers is that they dig around so much, they tend to muddy the waters. What was clear to us when we read it isn't so clear anymore. Okay, so it's basically saying the Bible isn't that difficult to read. Just read it and then just follow it. Okay, the problem is that people are trying to make it so complicated or make it difficult, make it seem hard. So they just make it harder than it needs to be. Agree, disagree? Really quick with your partners. What do you guys think about this statement in itself? Really quick, go for it.
That looks like a lot of enemies could be converted. Yeah, because I've had people tell me, yeah, I've read it, cover to cover. But they're still in the old ways. It doesn't work that way. They don't just read it and I've read it type thing.
Why?
So that's what,
Anybody can read this.
logic is not applied, especially when I see plenty of enemies read it. And it doesn't change their behavior, it doesn't change their thought pattern, always read it and say, I read it, but whatever.
Well, the core is always saying, you're saying that when you're trying to dig around too much, you make it more complicated.
Well, I think it's for a lot of writers. It's to force you to have to really think. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things that are very objective and all. Like, this person lived 200 years old. Can't interpret it any other way. But I think there are lines that may have some, maybe interpreted multiple ways. Maybe it's by design.
Because it's basically saying that you don't have to understand
It's
it,
good,
just
right?
do it. Right? I'm like, well, if I don't understand the meaning behind it,
Yeah.
why am I doing it? It's like,
But then the question is, what's the correct interpretation? Hotel California. When they asked, who wrote it? Yeah, I know, but would you remember who said it?
All right, let's come back together.
People interpret it one way, it's actually totally wrong.
The guy meant it.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, if you don't mind reading for us.
There is a lot of truth in this protest. We agree that Christians should learn to read, believe, and obey the Bible. And we especially agree that the Bible need not be an obscure book if read and studied properly. Yet at the same time, this argument is both naive and unrealistic because of the two factors, the nature of the reader and the nature of Scripture.
Okay, does that make sense? So there's two sides, okay? One part, there's two extremes, right? One extreme is, Bible is so easy. You just need to read it and, then just follow it kind of a thing. And that's saying we're naive. But at the same time, there's other extreme where we go, it's so difficult. Like, I can't read it. I'm just going to have pastor or special people or these kind of people interpret everything for us. And so it's somewhere in the middle where, it's not as easy as you think, but it's not as hard as you think. Right? Most of the problems that we have as Christians is not because the texts are too difficult for us, but because we're not actually applying it or willing to apply it. Okay, so we definitely, as Christians, we have problems with that as well. Okay, if we actually, I think as Christians, if we actually did what we actually believe, then a lot more people who are not Christians would be actually more convinced of Christianity. Okay, but anyways, so there's both of that side.
I think I said to you once, like, it's like the spectrum, the nature of the reader, the individual. Like
Yeah.
You could put someone in a super high performance car, and they could drive at like elite levels.
Yeah.
But they can't tell you how the car works,
Oh, okay.
right? But
Yeah.
they can use that vehicle, that
Sure.
machine, to like be high performing.
Yes, that's very
I
true.
love that analogy.
Yeah. And yet at the same time, if there's a manual,
Mm-hmm.
car manual, then we want to know about it so that we could actually utilize the car as best as we can. And we don't just say, oh, you could just drive it. Yeah. So there's both of these things are important. So we're trying to put both of these things together. All right, so here are the two factors why we need to actually learn to interpret. Okay, so if you're following on the notes, we're going to get to number one. Okay. Let's go to the first reason. Lizia?
The first reason one needs to learn how to interpret it, interpret is that every reader is at the same time
Hey, Sally?
interpreter. That is, most of us assume as we read that we also understand what we read. However, we invariably bring to the text all of that we are, with all of our culture, experiences, and prior understanding of words and ideas. Unintentionally, it leads us astray, or causes us to read all kinds of foreign ideas into the text.
And this is not just for the Bible, obviously. This is just in reading everything in general, right? Every one of us, we all have different experiences. We all have different definition of words. And so therefore, when we're reading something, what's going to happen? We're going to define it based on our experiences or how we see it or whatever context that we bring into it. So that's why we need to first understand that everybody brings different things into any text, any reading. And so therefore, that's why we need to interpret it well. Okay, because yes, some of your experiences might enlighten it, but some of your experiences might actually put barriers against the reading. Continue on. And these are some examples of it.
Thus, when a person in our culture read about church at worship, they often read about church and worship, they automatically envision people sitting in a building with pews much like our own. Or they, when think of the cross, they automatically think of a Roman cross, when it is most likely a T.
Okay. So again, when we think about people in they went to church or they had church, what do we think? We think of this church. But this church did not look like this 2,000 years ago. It was very, very different. But again, that's kind of the imagery that we have. Why? Because when we think of church, this is church for us. Okay. Same thing with the cross. Okay. We normally think it's crossed like this, but most likely the cross they use, it looked like more like a T. But again, when we think of a cross, we think this. Why? Because that's common for us. Okay. So again, are these things going to make too big of a difference? No, but there are certain things that makes a really, really big difference as you're reading the Bible. But we're just giving you some examples of this. So that's reason number one. Okay. All right. Number two.
This leads us to no further than Your Bible is in fact the end result of someone's interpretation from the Hebrew, the Greek. Lastly, both eternal security and possibility of losing one's salvation are preached in today's churches, yet both are not affirmed as the plain meaning of biblical texts. So the antidote to bad interpretations is not no interpretation, but good interpretation based on the common sense guidelines.
Okay, so number two reason is basically that every single one of us, unless you understand how to read Greek or Hebrew, all of us are already reading from an interpreted, like translated verse already, material already. Does that make sense? Right, so that's why me, like pastors, we have to learn how to actually be able to understand some Greek and Hebrew. Not proficiently, but enough where we could recognize certain things. Right? Because that in itself is already translated. Have you guys ever read books that has been translated? Right? And then you look at if you understand the original language, like there's certain books for me, like that are English books, but it's translated to Korean.
Yeah.
Or Korean books that are translated to English. But when I read those books, there's certain differences. Why? Because of translation. Right? So same thing with us as well. So we have to understand, so again, this is obviously for people who say, oh, no interpretation is needed. You know, I could just read the Bible, understand everything. It's like, no, that doesn't make sense. Because there's already some interpretation that's involved in translating. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. And number three is that there's even within church, like even now, right? Look at the Christian church today. Do you know how many like denominations there are? A lot. There's a lot. Okay. Most of them, actually, I don't know about most of them, but a lot of them, they believe, the reason why there's different denomination is because they believe in different things. But where are they getting all those things from? From the Bible. So again, just to say, okay, you should just read the Bible and everybody should have the same understanding, that's naive. Okay, because there's really for example, some people believe what eternal security means. Once you are saved, you cannot be unsaved. Okay? They get that from the Bible. So they believe that once you are saved, like you're set, you're like locked in. And there's nothing you could do to lose your salvation. These are what we call Calvinists, by the way. Okay? Adventists, we don't believe that. And then there's people who believe, like SDAs, that you could lose one's salvation. You could become a Christian, you could be saved, but you could also lose your salvation as well. Okay? But again, both of those people, they're not like one's getting it from the Bible and one's not getting it from the Bible. It's not that, right? They're both looking at the Bible and reading different texts and different understanding, and they're both gaining it. And so again, there's a need for interpretation. It's not as simple as, well, you just read it, Lee will read it, and Joel will read it, and everybody will be on the same page. And that's not the case. Okay? It's because we need to learn to interpret it the right way. Any questions about 1, 2, or 3? Any clarifications?
So the point that you're trying to make in 3 is that we need good interpretation.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need to learn to, and that's why I'm just giving you reasons why we need to learn to interpret it correctly.
Okay.
And why, and I'm also going to teach you guys why there's churches that make certain statements about certain things. And it's not because they're not reading the Bible, it's because they have bad ways of interpreting the Bible.
So I guess that kind of begs the question, though.
Yeah.
How do you determine bad interpretation from good interpretation?
Okay, we'll get to it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if I'm still not able to answer that question, then yeah. Any other questions?
Is Christianity the only religion with denominations?
No.
There's other.
Yeah, there's other religions. They all have different sects and denominations as well. Yeah.
Even Jewish.
Muslims have a lot of
Yeah, Muslims too.
too.
Yeah. Great questions.
but not as much as Christians.
Okay.
Well, Hindus.
Yeah, Hindus too.
Hindus have like so
Yeah.
many.
Well, they just have a lot of gods, so
Yeah,
they
more
have a lot
gods
of.
than religion,
1 million.
They have millions of
that's true. I
gods.
thought it was like
Yeah,
thousands.
it's like 1 million plus.
Which one I choose?
Okay. Any other clarifications? Okay. Sally, by the way, there's paper over there if you want to. If you don't have to, but if you want to, you could take notes there. Okay. So that's the first reason, that it's because it involves a human being, And because we're human beings, we bring something into the text. And so that's why, again, we need to be careful about ourselves. Okay? The second part is the book in itself, the Bible in itself. Okay? By the way, all of these things so far, you could apply this to any book as well. It's not just the Bible so far. Okay. All right, let's go. Let's go. Number 2. Sally, if you don't mind reading for us.
Second, a more significant reason for the need to interpret lies in the nature of Scripture itself. Historically, the Church has understood the nature of Scripture much the same as it has understood the person of Christ. The Bible is at the same time both human and divine, which means because the Bible is God's message, it has eternal relevance. Yet because God chose to speak His word through human words in history, every book in the Bible also has historical particularity. It was some specific situations and people.
Okay. So that's the thing that gets muddied as well. Okay? Some people go into it and say, is this still relevant to me today? That's the question that people ask, right? And so we have to first understand the Bible in itself was written to very specific type of people in specific situation. Okay? And yet at the same time, there's things that we can still learn from it, and there's still things that God still wants us to hear from it. Does that make sense? So it's not totally historical, yet it is historical as well. Okay, that's important. And then we're going to see there's different interpretation because of that. There's some people who believe it's only historical. So it has no relevance for us today specifically. And so everything was in the past 2,000 years ago. It was only for the Jewish people. You hear things like that. Or you hear things like, no, all of these things, it's 100%. It's for us. And so we need to, every single thing that's written in the Bible, we have to follow every single thing. Okay? And so again, what's the balance? And that's, again, we're going to continue on, and we're going to see what are some of the guidelines we can take. Okay. All right, let's keep going.
God chose to use almost every available kind of communication. Narrative history, genealogies, chronicle, laws of all kinds, poetry of all kinds, proverbs, prophetic oracles, riddles, drama, biographical sketches, parables, letters, sermons, and apocalypses. Therefore, we need to learn the special rule that applies to each of these literary forms.
Yeah. So we have to understand that God used different people, and different people, when they were inspired, they used different literary styles or genres. So that means we have to understand those genres as well. And we learned that like in our like high school and college classes, like in English, there's like different forms of literature. Okay, and so we have to learn to read those differently as well. So I'll give you an example. Genesis chapter 1, okay, SDAs, we don't take that as poetry. We take that literally. So we believe that God literally made this world in 6 days. However, there's other Christians out there who believe that Genesis 1 is actually poetry. It's not, okay? Then, what do you do in poetry? Do you take everything literally? No. Right? You take it symbolically, and you don't take it so literally. Right? So we understand that. It depends on what kind of literature, what kind of genre it is. Then the way we interpret it will be different as well. So what we're trying to say is the Bible text in itself, depending on what book or what section of the reading, it has different genres in there. And so that's why it's not as simple as you just read it and you understand it. Does that make sense so far? Okay. Let's keep going.
As the task of interpreting involves the student and reader at the two levels. First, we must try to understand what was said to them back then and their
Exegesis,
Second, we must learn to hear that same word in the here and now.
Hermeneutics, yeah. So I know these are very big words, okay? But basically, exegesis is what was God trying to tell the people, the original people who heard these texts. Okay? That's what exegesis is. Trying to understand, okay, what did God try to tell these people? The original hearers. Okay? That's the science of trying to understand. Okay? And the hermeneutics is what is God trying to tell us today through these texts? Okay? What are some things that are not relevant, and what are some things that are relevant to us still today? Okay, do you understand the difference between exegesis and hermeneutics? And both of these things has to be done. Okay, if you don't, then there's, again, because people are not properly doing these two things, we have a lot of issues and debates and conflicts.
At what point does it not become exegesis? Like, so if you were 60 years after crucifixion of Jesus, the Gospels were written.
Yeah.
So people were reading those.
Yeah.
That's exegesis.
Yes.
Like they're reading that.
Yes.
At what point is it 100 years later, 200 years later
Right.
that it becomes?
I think anybody outside of not the original intended.
So once that generation.
Yeah, I think so. I would say
Or
so.
generations
Mhm.
roll off, it's now hermeneutic.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
farther away from that point in time,
Yeah.
the more it's gonna turn to
Hermeneutics,
versus
yeah.
exegesis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Any clarification so far? Okay. Okay. Get back. Go into your groups. Just kind of. What do you understand so far? What is your thought so far on this? Go for it, really quick.
The nature of the reader, so it's like basically like we're all from different places and cultures. So we're all gonna naturally, just based on how we lived our life today, that we're all in different
The third reason why we
experiences
need
and
to
bring
learn
that
to interpret the Bible is
text.
there's so many and then
Third reason right here.
do we know that our interpretation is true? Because not everyone's on the same page, but so many scholars have studied the hermeneutics, landed on the same page. That's why there's so many. So I think it's just really important. I learned like mine. But it's good to have good commentaries, good classification. But for me, I think it's it comes it's hard for me because the Bible is not written on
And it's your
Sort of
fault.
in the direction.
I think it's helpful to have a
That's what I
kind of like understand it.
Yeah. I always found my reading comprehension to be kind of a little bit lacking. How about yourself?
Oh,
More
second
for
reading.
reverence.
Oh, this one, the nature of the scripture. It says a scripture can be seen as
Correction, that was right brain, right brain. They take me from like, yeah.
One is math comparable.
Yeah, math is preferable.
the Bible is at the same channel of both human and divine.
Or take like English class.
What about the channel that has
English comprehension, all those. Fine.
All right, let's come back together. Let's come back together. All
I
right.
do get a little creative. I make it yourself.
So, okay, once again, what is exegesis?
What was God trying to say to them?
To the original intended recipients. Okay, original readers. All right, very good. Whose turn? Is it Kevin's turn? All right.
Exegesis involves a careful, systematic study of the Bible to discover the original intended meaning. This is primarily a historical task. It is an attempt to hear the word as the original recipients to find out what was the original intent of the message. This is a task that often calls for the help of the expert. In fact, everyone is an exegete of sorts. The only real question is whether you will be a good one. How many times, for example, have you heard or said what Jesus meant by that was, or back in those days they used to, these are exegetic prose expressions.
Yeah. So most people, we're already doing exegesis without even knowing these kind of fancy words. Okay, when we're doing Bible study together, for example, on Friday, we do a lot of this together. Okay, because we're all looking at the Bible together, and then we're trying to say, okay, what was Jesus trying to say here? Or what did they mean by that? Okay, what did it mean in their context? Okay, so again, you guys already are doing some of this. Okay, the thing we have to do is try to be better at this. Okay, not just do it. All right, let's keep going.
There are two basic kinds of questions one should ask of every biblical passage, historical and literary. The historical context has to do with several matters, the time and culture of the author and the audience, that is, the geographical and political factors that are relevant to the author's setting. A good biblical dictionary parentheses, internet, will generally supply the need here. Another important question of historical context has to do with the occasion and purpose of each book. Here one wants to have an idea of what was going on in Israel or the church that called forth such a document. The answer to this question is usually to be found when it can be found within the book itself.
Okay, so a lot of material here. So basically, the first question that you need to ask, it's about historical context. Okay, when was it written? How was the culture of that time? And the culture of the author and the audience. Because you have to understand their culture, right? Because if you don't understand their culture, then what are you going to do? You're going to bring your culture in, and you're going to impose your culture and say, oh, this is why they're behaving this way, or oh, they shouldn't behave this way, things like that. Okay? And then we need to know the geography of what's going on. Okay, of certain things, we have to understand the geography. Certain things, we have to understand the political the factors. Okay, so for example, when Jesus was there, what was the politics going on? What was the government? Okay, what was the status like? Like, for example, we know that the Romans, they were under Roman rule, the Jewish people. That's important. Why? Because that's going to color everything, the understanding we have of the reading. If we don't understand that, we just go, oh, why is there so much conflict with the Romans? Why are they listening to the Romans? It's not going to make sense. Okay, so a lot of these things, obviously, we don't have this unless you went to school and learned it like myself. Okay, however, there's books out there. So a good Bible, it's called Bible Dictionary. And the good thing about internet is you have all of this at your disposal. You don't have to go to some fancy, you don't have to buy a fancy book. Of course, if you want to, you can. But a lot of it, you can find a lot of these information. But you just have to be careful. Internet has a lot of good stuff, but it has a lot of bad stuff too. They get it from like second source or third source. Okay, so I'll give you a good example of this. Okay, do you guys know that text about there was a rich young ruler, and then he came, and then basically Jesus says, give up all your money and give it to the poor, and then he got really sad and left. And then Jesus said what? Jesus said, it is impossible for the rich to be saved. It's like what? Donkey that will, camel trying to go into what? Eye of a needle. Very good. So there's some people that actually researched upon it, and they realized, I don't know if you guys heard of this or not. Okay, they said, Jesus didn't actually mean the eye of a needle. There was actually a gate called the Needle near Israel, okay, Jerusalem. And then it was a really small gate. And so the camels had a really hard time getting in there. Do you guys know that?
Oh, I always thought of a needle.
Yeah. Okay, you guys didn't know that. Okay, you guys didn't know that. Okay, good. Okay, because that's not true. Okay? However, some people, okay, it was written like the original source comes like somewhere in like, at least what we found so far, it's like in the 13th century. So about 1,300 years after Jesus. Okay, that theory came up. Okay? However, some preachers decided to use that. And so they use it, and then again, it's like they don't go back to the original source and try to actually see did that really even occur? Did that even exist? Okay, but they just saw this source and they just said, oh, like this scholar in the 13th century said it, so it must be true. Rather than going back to the original source. Okay, so things like that can trip people up. All right, and so the first thing you need to have at disposal would be a good Bible dictionary, and then try to read about it. Because Bible dictionary, it's kind of, if you look for the words like Samaria or something, then it tells you more about Samaria. Okay, things like that.
Do you consider Logos? Because you mentioned that, and I downloaded it to be a good
Yeah, Logos is actually really good.
Yeah, and it's free.
It's free, but some things like you have to buy it too.
Yeah, but the free one's pretty good.
Is it?
Like people like me.
Oh, okay.
Okay. You might need the premium version.
Is it like an app?
It's an app, yeah. But there's a lot of other free stuff out there. Like you don't have to download this app. Yeah, because there's a lot of Logos. Actually, it could be too much. Yeah, and then some things you have to buy. Yeah, so.
But that's the thing, like with understanding context and understanding interpretation.
Yeah.
Because for me, I always saw as Jesus being funny when he was saying that, because he wouldn't ever be like say that like rich people can go to heaven, like it's impossible. He blessed so many people, they were so rich through the Bible. So he is obviously, for, people being abandoned here, and that it's not impossible for them to go. So it's not like he's saying that, he was just being like playful.
Yeah.
He's saying that it can be difficult, but not like impossible.
Well, and then if you just read within the context, Jesus actually says it is impossible, but with God it is possible.
Yeah, well.
So he doesn't say like there's no hope for rich
Yeah,
people.
exactly,
Yeah,
yeah.
because none of us have hope then, because we're all pretty rich in here.
And he wouldn't have blessed so many people in the Bible to start with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So very good, very good. So the first thing that you want to be able to understand. Now, again, we're not talking about like every time you're reading the Bible. There's times where you just want to do a devotional, you just want to read it, and most of us, I think, do devotional. Okay, and that's fine. But this is talking about if you want to do more in-depth stuff, then you also want to do this. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Now, second one is literary context. Luis.
The most important question you will ever ask is, what's the point? What's the author saying? And why does he say it right here? Having made this point, what is he saying next? And why? To do this task, it is imperative that one uses a translation that recognizes poetry and paragraphs.
Okay, and King James Version and New American Standard Version, they don't do this very well. Okay, so literary context is the context that whenever we think of context, this is what literary context is. Okay, it's, what can we do? Like if you just take out, like for example, like interviews on like YouTube or things like that, if you cut it down, like you could make people say all sorts of things. Okay, and there's like that, things like that all the time, right? And so literary context is, okay, overall, what is the author trying to say? Okay, instead of just taking one thing out of context and just say, oh, look, this is what Jesus said, and so therefore you must do this. Or this is what Paul said, so you must do this. Rather, it's like overall, what's his main message? And why did he put it here? Like, does it all make sense within the overall frame? Okay.
And does it also have to do with like the type of literary devices being used?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where King James Version and NASB, they don't do this as well. Yeah. Like for example, certain Bibles, when they think it's poetry, they make it look like poetry. They like the sentence structure. But like King James Version and NASB, they don't do that. And so it could kind of get confusing because some of it, you're reading it and you're just reading it as it's not poetry, it's literal. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So again, we're not saying these are less versions or these are not good. It just doesn't do that for us. So we have to learn to do it ourselves. Whereas there's other translations that actually just do it for you. Okay, and they organize it more for you. Okay, but of course, the organization, sometimes it involves their interpretation as well. And so we do have to take it with a grain of sand. Okay, any question about historical, or I think there's actually one more sentence. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, no. Okay, any questions about historical or literary? So again, historical is trying to understand what kind of situation they were in. And then literary is within this verse. Like, what is he talking about?
In your opinion, Pastor, what form of Bible translation do you think is best for our purpose of literary context?
Very good. We're getting there.
Oh.
Okay, good. Very good question. Okay, I even have a little chart for you. This very confusing chart for you guys down here. Okay, so we're getting there. Very good. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, so exegesis is what? One more time.
What was Jesus trying to say to the crowd back then?
Right. What was God trying to say to the original hearers? So we have to understand that first. Okay, very important. This first step cannot be skipped. Okay, we're going to talk about why. Okay, next. I'll go, yeah. Hermeneutics. Once again, hermeneutics is trying to figure out the Bible's meaning in the here and now. Okay, exegesis, original. Hermeneutics, now. In 2023, how do we understand this? Okay. To do hermeneutics well, you must do the job of exegesis first. Okay, why? Most of the hermeneutical error happens because of bad exegesis or no exegesis whatsoever. So again, maybe you didn't understand the culture well. So you go, oh, okay, this is what it means. How can I apply it? But you did this wrong. So you understood this wrong, so how can you apply it correctly now? Okay. They have started with the here and now and have read into the text meaning. They were not originally that were not originally intended or indeed. Okay, I think it's intended. So, for example, if you just read this, women should keep silent in church. No, silent. Okay, so but again, you go, oh, that's ridiculous or things like that. But there are churches like that. Okay, where they say, yeah, it's not that women are lower. It's just that this is what it says in the Bible. So therefore, pastors should not be. Women should not be pastors or teachers. Okay, because why? It's clearly written right here. But that's what we call hermeneutics. They're not doing exegesis at all. They're not understanding, okay, why did Paul write this? What was the book of 1 Corinthians all about? What was going on during that time that Paul actually said this? Does that make sense? Okay, so for example, okay, so in Corinthians, situation was that in Corinthians there were a lot of priests that were females of different religions. Yeah, and so again, a lot of them, what they did was they either sold their body, okay, and things like that, okay? And so whenever people would think of women, then what are they thinking of? They're thinking about, oh, like these are highly figured, but there's prostitution or sex involved with it, okay? And so is it possible that Paul was speaking based on that kind of context?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I was gonna say something, Pastor.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I was in Greece and in Corinth, like our college,
Like you actually went there.
I went there.
Okay, good.
So I was there. And our colleges was explaining that a lot of these women, because they would be like walking around, because the temple of Athens was there. It was so strong. Like all the Christian guys were struggling to really not be with the prostitutes. So some of them would get converted to church, but they were used to speak up because they were prophets for their, orgies and their religion. So because they were getting converted, they didn't have the full truth. They were still learning. So for that church, that's the only church that Paul talks about that. It was better, and if you continue to read the text, you're gonna say like, go back home and ask your husband about it. Because the husbands were the ones that had been converted first. So it was better for them to not speak because they would talk mixed information. So they would go back home and talk to their husbands, and their husband will explain to them better than open up your mouth in church and saying things about your orgies past mixed with the truth. So look like how crazy the context.
Yeah. So again, this is why exegesis is important. Okay, so again, if you just do hermeneutics first, then you're going to read this, and in 2023, that's a no-no. And so you just burn the Bible altogether. Okay? So again, instead of doing that, you have to understand the original context first. Okay? And are there certain things that we'll never understand in 2023? Absolutely. Or are there certain things that you might disagree with? Absolutely. Okay? But again, we have to first do exegesis well first. Okay? Instead of just reading this and just go, okay, all the girls, don't say anything. Once you get out of church, you can start saying something. Yeah. Okay? Things like that. Okay? All right, let's keep going.
The questions of hermeneutics are not at all easy, nor will all agree on how one goes about this task. But this is the crucial area, and believers need to learn to talk to one another about these questions and to listen. However, one statement, surely we can be in agreement. A text cannot mean what it could never have meant for its original readers/hearers.
Okay. Does that make sense? So, as we go to different genres and different books, we're going to give you more hermeneutical principles. Because depending on what kind of book you're reading, it's going to be different, right? But one thing for sure is a text cannot mean what it could not have meant for the original hearers.
What?
Okay? So, whatever the original hearers, okay? If it was not... So, we have to do, basically, when we do exegesis, our exegesis and hermeneutic cannot be different. Oh. So, what they heard and what you hear today cannot be different things.
Okay.
It has to be on the same line.
Okay.
Yeah, same principle at least.
Oh, same principle.
Yeah, same principle.
So are these more, because in Timothy, because in the plan that we're reading,
Yes.
he says the same thing, and then he says some other things about women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it that exegesis like in these letters that Paul wrote, which were to a particular church at
Yes.
a moment in
Yeah.
time, helping them, and then it's put into the Bible.
Yeah.
Is there examples of exegesis which are not relevant to us today? Like women should sell in church. Should we just
Sure.
say it's actually not relevant to 2020?
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
that was a moment in time.
Exactly.
for the church.
Yeah. So there's stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, even in that time, because the other church, the women could talk. It's just that one that he couldn't.
Yeah, because there's other cases where we see like
Yeah.
Paul actually encouraging women to.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is
Teach
like if
and-
someone like challenges that there's bad things in the Bible, you would say that's exegesis.
Right. So we have to first.
Like that, like
Yeah. So not every single problem that people have with the Bible today can be just like that.
not
Right.
every single.
Not
No,
every
I'm
single
saying
thing.
that There
There are certain
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There are
For
certain
sure.
things.
lightning rod.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because we don't want to just say, oh yeah, everything we understand in 23 is correct, and so therefore everything in the Bible is wrong either. I'm not saying we need to do that either. Yeah. Because we could be wrong about certain things, even though we don't like to think that as a culture. We think that everything that we're doing in 23 is correct, but that's actually not
But if
true.
you have the knowledge
Yeah.
of like what you just explained, then you've researched it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You're not
Then
just
you're actually doing some
assuming.
exegesis to say hermeneutically it's not relevant today.
Okay.
But you can't just say, oh, because I don't like it,
Right.
we don't need to do it. Yeah. Rather, we need to understand, okay, what did it mean? And yes, in my culture, this is absolutely like wrong, but maybe I have bad understanding. Is that a possibility? Okay. So things like that. Very good. Let's keep going. Lizia?
It is difficult to give rules for hermeneutics. What we offer through the following lessons, therefore, are guidelines. You may not agree with our guidelines. We do not hope that your disagreement will be battered in Christian charity. And perhaps our guidelines will serve to stimulate your own thinking on these matters.
Yeah. So basically, again, the writers of this book, same thing. They have their own thoughts and their own, right? There's things that you guys might disagree with as we go along, and that's fine too. Okay. All right. So let's go into translations now. Okay. Okay. Actually, let's stop really quick. Just kind of, just give your thoughts on what we went over so far. Go for it. Let me go get battery.
This whole, like, what do you There are churches. Christian church like that. It's so bad. They use the veil and they don't. No, I have been there. I have visited a church like that.
So
But they
he said-
really cannot serve the church.
I gotta go
Because
back
they
and
didn't
research that.
study the
Women
Bible.
should learn
Like
to
they
sound
didn't like
wholesome
put things
and I
in
do not
context.
allow
The guys like that verse. They make, sense for their own, personal beliefs. So
And
they
then it
don't
says
look
like
else.
she can only be saved
help herself
through
out.
childbirth.
And they put in the doctrine and everybody
I didn't
else.
read that. So it's like what she said is like there's
It's
things
my
like
first time
hearing it, so I was like, oh wow, okay. But then like you
we're
Like,
talking
you gotta
about
control
like
this
at first.
church.
You just need to read
You gotta do
another
this
book.
thing.
Fully Colossians.
It's like all
Romans.
control that
Women are
all the time.
speaking.
For all of us.
So like you don't even need that much.
So I don't know
Why
what
would
point
explain
you
self
came in, like, what part of it they actually got to listen to.
Exegesis.
Exegesis.
Oh, I see.
That's why when I try to engage with
Well, that's exactly where the exegesis comes in. Well, they were saying that verse right there, women should have quiet in church. They're saying that a lot, like in that time, the church, a lot of women
Is that
were
telling you?
Oh, I gotta do
and
this.
then
This is
they
what
were
Nicole
the
told me when I
ones
do the
who
children's
were
story today. I just
practicing
grabbed
like
my phone.
prostitution, orgies from other religions that they mentioned before. So in that context, they were saying that they should help subside culture. Instead, they need to go talk to their husbands or who, and then come back to the talk. Because like, it's gonna cause a lot of confusion, it's not the right, thing to say and stuff, so that's why it's saying that we really need to know.
What is your thing?
I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what
Same Spaniards.
Okay.
Translates to English as castle. Castillo.
Castillo?
Castillo, yeah. In Spanish, Castillo.
Mine is,
Ancient.
And then they they might
You know how they
say
say
one
like the
thing
last
and
thing,
then
and it's some kind of reference to like
don't
the
talk
trade that
about
your
the
ancestors
same
had
one,
at
try
some
to teach
point.
the younger ones.
It was like,
Because I feel like
Castle Guard. Maybe
younger
just Castle Guard was like
adults
just bummed
are
out.
struggling to kind of like
Some of them would get.
decide
Yeah, like
for
when the German
themselves.
speaking.
Yeah.
Christian man, if you think about it, that they don't
Our
actually
church
all
culture-
Yeah, they would change your German name back to Kaufler, like whatever their profession was. They would like take the German and put it
Look at the culture and what
So we have so many Smiths,
up here. Like, I know a lot of
pagan.
my friends who don't come to church anymore because
No.
the culture was like 10, 20 years ago. They were like, that
So
was
Paul was saying, put it
Oh,
in
yeah,
the
they take
rest
like
of
the
the
name of
verse.
the,
Well,
yeah, the presidents, or they take like
They go
the,
back
I guess from their, plantation owners, yeah, that would kind of show
Maybe
you
it was
long
gave
for
us
them.
more understanding of our
like that,
honestly, you know?
How they interpreted the Bible, you know?
That's crazy because I think
interrupting
in
and
like
saying
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things that are a
decade
little.
of time, there's like so
This
much
is,
change.
yeah.
And that's our culture has
Yeah.
changed.
This makes me think now, okay, what's the history? What was your
That's the whole point. You're supposed to, whenever you're studying, like you want to be as analytical and as objective with it. Like, and also emotionally, like, is this emotionally appealing or not emotionally appealing? So it's like you have to like kind of get your senses around it.
I still think that, like, for me, it's like I gotta read the whole thing.
Like you were in the town, and you look it up, and it's
Go
like,
back and
you're
read
just
it.
reading it for you.
Yeah.
Because it'd be like,
Maybe you
I'm
don't
gonna go back
understand
and
anymore, maybe you
Genesis
understand
one,
it,
and
and
then
then
you're
you're
like,
like,
you're like,
like,
change it.
and they would get drugged.
And then if you read through it, at least you'll be like, oh wait, I remember reading something like this somewhere over here before, so you'll have that reference automatically. Me personally, I just hit the Google search, but I think that's the cool thing of like of reading the whole thing through.
Do you listen to your little search podcast?
Go to the church.
Often,
This is so good. This is like just like a normal night. And they do these little cartoons, but they break down like every single
Honestly, dude, this is
Okay, let's come back together. Let's come back together. Okay. Now, I'm sure you have heard of something called commentaries before. That's what commentaries are, hermeneutics. Okay? So that's the difference between Bible dictionary and then Bible commentary. Bible dictionary, they do more of the exegesis stuff. Of course, and then Bible commentaries, they do more hermeneutic stuff. Of course, they do both at the same time as well. So what I would suggest is first, you try to do it on your own as much as you can. Okay? So you try to study the Bible, you try to read, you try to understand. Okay? You could, again, search the internet, Bible dictionary, and then read it for yourself. What's the context? And try to read the whole chapter instead of just this little dinky thing or the whole book. Okay? And afterwards, then read the commentary. Okay? And then try to compare your thoughts and their thoughts. Because if you just read the commentary first, then what's going to happen? When you read it, you're going to read with whatever the commentator said first. Okay? Not to say that commentators are all wrong, but they could be. And like I could be wrong. Right? There's things that I always bring to the table that I could be wrong. Okay, very good. Okay, good translation. Whose turn to read? Is it Hannah or? Okay.
The 66 books of the Bible were originally written in 3 different languages: Hebrew,
Aramaic.
and Greek. We assume that most people do not know these languages. That means, therefore, that one's basic tool for reading and studying the Bible is a contemporary English translation.
Yeah, OT, Old Testament. Aramaic was used in half of the Daniel and 2 passages in, and then Greek is in New Testament. And so that's why, unfortunately, for me, I had to learn both Hebrew and Greek. Okay.
Why was Aramaic used in only
Some parts of it,
so
some parts of
small
it.
and
Yeah.
half,
So there's a lot of different theories on that. So the theory, okay. So some people say it's because it was actually different writers, and then some people say, like for example, Daniel used it because he wanted to convey it in different, like so Hebrew and Aramaic, they're not the same, but they're based similarly, and so the original. The half of the Daniel that was written, it was more for the Jewish people because they were using Aramaic back then. Yeah. So there's different theories on why there is that. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going. By the way, Grace, my wife, she's like Greek. She's really good. Like she could read the Bible like in Greek and just like understand it all.
That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. But don't ask me, I don't know. That's why I don't talk too much about Greek in my sermon, because she's always like, you're wrong. You didn't do it right. Okay. But she's a scholar, so what can I do? All right. Let's next.
To read in translation is not a bad thing, yet at the same time, the person who reads the Bible only in English is at the mercy of the translators, and translators often had to make choices as to what, in fact, the original author was really intending to express, which involves interpretation from the translators.
Yeah. Okay. So for example, we have two Hispanic speakers. Okay. So let's say a Hispanic pastor came, and if Luis translated, and then if Belen translated, then there's hopefully the core content is similar, but there's gonna be some detail and certain things that's gonna be translated differently, right? Because that's what interpretation is. Okay. So same thing. That's what it's talking about here. Okay. All right. Let's keep going.
The translation you're using will, of course, be correct most of the time, but at times it also may not be. Let's take, for example, the following four translations of 1 Corinthians 8:36.
Okay, this is New King James Version, which says, if any man thinks that he is behaving improperly towards his virgin. Okay, NASB, New American Standard Bible Version, it's based off of the King James. If any man thinks towards his virgin daughter. That's very different, huh? Okay, next one. NIV, if anyone towards the virgin he is engaged to. Okay, fourth one. I don't know what this one is. If anyone has a partner in celibacy. Okay. So again, this is very vague. Okay, because that's what the Greek actually says. Okay, so some people, they think, oh, it's talking about his daughter. Or, oh, some people think it's talking about fiance. And same thing here. Okay. Actually, this one is totally different. This one is, it's already, you're married, but you guys are deciding not to have sex. Okay? So again, you look at this and you go, oh, what does it mean? Okay? It's because the Greek itself is ambiguous. So some people, they don't want to leave it ambiguous like this. So some people, they translate their thought into it. Not because it's like, oh, I like this one better, but they did their own study and they feel like that makes more sense. Do you guys see what I'm talking about? Okay. All right, let's keep going. Noah, do you want to read for us?
The new NKJV is a very literal but not very helpful, since it leaves the term virgin and the relationship between the man and his virgin quite ambiguous. One thing of certain, Paul did not intend to be ambiguous. So, which one is the correct translation?
Okay. So when Paul was writing to the Corinthians, they understood exactly what he was talking about, right? Because again, he was writing the letter to them. So it wasn't, but for us, again, 2,000 years later, then it's kind of like, which one did he mean? So again, we have to do proper what?
Interpretation?
Exegesis. Yeah, which is interpretation, yeah. So we have to do proper exegesis. Okay, what's the context? What's the literary context? What's the historical context? Okay? And because of all of that, we think it's this one. This one is, again, but I could be wrong. Okay? But at least the author thinks it's this one within all the different contexts. Okay? All right, so again, we're not trying to tell you that all these translations are bad. It's just that there's differences. That's what I'm trying to get at. Okay. All right, let's keep going.
First, it is probably a good practice to regularly read one main translation. This will aid in memorization as well as give you consistency. However, for the study of the Bible, you should use several well-chosen translations.
Okay, so use one. When you're doing your devotion, just use one. Okay? And I'll tell you which ones. I'm gonna explain all of these for you guys. Okay, and then you could choose. But then when you're studying, you should choose several one of these and then kind of compare. That's going to be helpful. All right, let's keep going.
There are two kinds of choices that translators must make, textual and
Linguistic.
linguistic. The first kind has to do with the actual wording of the original text. The second has to do with the translator's theory of translation that underlines their rendering of the text into English.
Okay, very nice. And then we'll explain that more. Okay, the first one.
The first concern of translators is to be sure that the Hebrew or Greek text they are using is as close as possible to the original wording as it left the author's hands. We do not have the original handwritten copies of any biblical book, but what does exist are thousands of copies produced by hand called manuscripts, which have copied repeatedly. As you can imagine, later manuscripts differ significantly from the earlier copies and translations. The problem, therefore, is to sift through all the available material, compare the places where the manuscripts differ, and determine which of the variants represent the original text.
Okay, so very wordy. It's basically saying we don't have the original like papers or the manuscripts of the original people who wrote the Bible. Okay, we don't have any of them. Okay. However, we have a bunch of copies. We have a lot of copies. Okay. But certain books, like King James Version, it's based on later manuscripts. Okay, because it was still when they didn't find all the different manuscripts yet. Okay. Whereas like NIV, it's more based on earlier manuscript. Do you understand what I mean by later manuscript and earlier? Earlier meaning closer to the original when it was originally written, and later means later to when it was originally written. Okay?
Wait, say that again, Pastor?
So we have a lot of different copies of the Bible. Some of it, it's very early. Some of it, it's very late.
Okay.
Okay? From when it was originally written.
In King James Version, it's earlier.
No, it's later.
It's later?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's why I know there's even within, especially SDA churches, there's very faithful King James people.
Yeah, I hear
And very faithful New King James people. Then they're like, if you read anything else, then you're a horrible person, that kind of thing. However, sorry to burst their bubbles, but it's actually, a lot of it is based on late manuscripts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's because when it was originally written, they didn't have all the manuscripts available.
Found the
Yeah, they didn't find all of it.
Nice.
But now we found more manuscripts. Yeah. Okay. Again, but not a lot of these things are going to be major, huge differences.
Yeah.
Okay, like Jesus actually didn't resurrect.
It's
It's not stuff like that. Okay, but there's still these are very minor details that are going to be different, and that could change your theology a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So the first concern is, which manuscript do I use as a translator? Which one is the most correct? Okay, it's to figure that out. And so based on that, you're going to have different translations, depending on what kind of... Now, some of the books actually will tell you, and so that's why some of them, for example, I'm using HCSB, but I change my version every year. But anyways, that one, it tells you what different manuscript has. If they have a little bit slightly different phrasing, then they tell me exactly what it is as well. Okay. So there are certain books that tell you different, if it has some things that are added or some things that were taken away, it tells you exactly what they are. Okay. All right. So that's the first concern, is which one? Okay. Number 2. Whose turn? Kev?
Second concern has to do with verbal and grammatical choices. Do you want to stay as true to original writer, even though it makes no sense to the receptor language, or do you want to change the phrases to make it more understandable but also move further from the original text? These are not easy decisions. Our view is that the best theory is to do both, but when something has to give, it should be in favor of the receptor language.
Okay, so this one has to do with every time that you're translating, do you want to translate as literally as possible? Or do you want to translate so that whoever is listening to the translation understands it as much as possible? Okay, and so depending on your theory of that, how you translate is going to change. Does that make sense? Okay, because there's certain phrases, there's certain words that's not translatable. Okay, and then there are certain phrases that you translate it and it makes zero sense in English. But that's the literal translation. Does that make sense? There's idioms, there's jokes. There's phrases, there's words that you just cannot translate. Okay, so it's like, do I still want to make it as literal as possible, or do I just want to convey the message that they're trying to say? Okay, so with that comes this paper. Okay, this chart right here, this chart. Okay, so when it means by formal equivalence, that means they're trying to stay as true to the Greek or the Hebrew as much as possible. However, it's very difficult to read. Why? Because it's very, very literal. Okay, like English and Hebrew is not the same. English and Greek are not the same. And so the way they talk, the things, it's going to be harder. But you're going to get as close to the literal as possible in this category right here. Right here. It's more, it's like it's a spectrum. Okay, so King James Version, New King. If you don't know what this means, I don't know all of them either. Just look it up on the internet. You'll be able to find it. Okay.
And so even within that left column, more to the right of the left column is less literal.
Yes, and that's what we're getting to. Yeah. And then we get to the other extreme. This is the Living Word, or New Living. I think it's called Living Bible. The Message. Have you guys heard of the Message? Okay. Yeah. This, it does not get close to the Greek or the. I'm not saying they like totally throw it away altogether, but they basically paraphrase it for you. So instead of, their idea is not trying to get to the closest to the Greek or the Hebrew, but what are they trying to say? But because of that, there's a lot more interpretation that goes into this. Because they're interpreting all of those things and then they're paraphrasing it. Okay? So again, there's pros and cons to both. But obviously, I think if you're studying, you should stay more towards this side. Yeah, if you're doing like devotional, you could stay on this side if you want. But even then, you should be very careful because you should just maybe feel good reading this or understand the text, but not like make decisions about God based on these things over here.
A good example of that is I was reading an article on an immigrant from Venezuela that had to make the entire journey.
Sure.
And he had like a smaller book.
Okay.
Which I bet you lean more to the free, because it can condense it. So if you're traveling with like a backpack through a jungle,
sure,
you would just want to be light and not carry like a king.
Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. Okay, and then this is basically in between. They try to, and then over here on this side, they try to do more literal, and then on this side, they try to be more free, but they also take account. Okay. So I would say when you're doing your study, like basically pick one from here, pick one from here, and pick one from here. And then compare the three to get a better idea. Yeah, but it's not as different as newspapers because they have. Yeah. Okay. Any question about this chart? So again, you have this chart in that paper. So.
So when studying, it's good to choose a translation from different.
Yeah, just to compare.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just to compare. Again, this is not. It's not. A lot of the things we're talking about here, it's not good for devotion, because this takes longer time. Devotional, just stay on this side of the field and then do that. But when you're doing a little more in depth, but hopefully you guys are doing some in depth as well. Because one thing I can teach you, the best thing I could teach you is to teach you how to read the Bible for yourself. Because I can tell you all day long about what I think about the Bible, but again, that has my interpretation, and you guys have to be always dependent on someone else. And I could be wrong sometimes too. So, but if I could teach you guys how to read the Bible for yourselves, it's very powerful. All right. So let's end with a joke. If it's not funny to you, then don't worry. Okay. Yeah, just don't laugh. Yeah. Okay. So the Message version says, "Mama, I'm hungry." Amplified version says, "Mummy, I am hungry, famished, or starving." So again, because some versions like Amplified, they tell you different Greek words that it could mean different things. Okay. All right. NIV says, "Mother, I am hungry." Okay. So this one is more like it's less formal, and then it gets a little more formal. Okay. KJV, henceforth, let it be known unto thee, birth giver, that my belly consists of emptiness.
That sounds Korean.
Okay.
Is that an actual sentence?
It's not actual Bible verse, okay? It's just a joke. Okay. All right. Okay, we're done. Okay, we don't have time for discussion. Okay, let's finish.